Peloton is easily one of the most recognizable brands from the health and lifestyle space, with a market cap of over $47 billion at its peak, a short-term stock return that delivered decades worth of market gains in less than a year, and a controversial ad campaign that had everyone divided on it for days. It should come to no surprise that Peloton's business and stock price was some of the most talked about amongst Wall Street and Main Street, or really Wall Street bets, during the COVID era. Fortunately for Peloton's shareholders, Peloton's stock and business success, like my college relationship, continued to last forever. Just kidding. 3 weeks after she moved away from medical school, she convinced me to travel halfway across the country to come visit her and that I should definitely book the room with the view for 4 days, only to break up with me 4 hours after getting there. Oh yeah, and an investment in Peloton stock at its peak valuation would leave you with just pennies on the dollar today and dramatically diluted ownership in a company that's on the verge of bankruptcy. All within less than 2 years' time, mind you, leaving you absolutely trounced by the market. Well that felt good to get off my chest, but seriously, with such a vast change of fortune and public opinion so severe and quick, I thought it would be fun to go over what I believe are 5 interesting reasons as to why an investment in Peloton stock made shareholders go broke. Now before I go over the 5 reasons, I should probably just quickly explain what Peloton is, in case you live under a rock and have no idea what I'm talking about. Peloton, as described by the company itself from its most recent annual report, is a leading global fitness company with millions of users worldwide, a category innovator at the nexus of fitness, technology, and media. Peloton's first of its, okay, you know what? I'm not doing this. Peloton makes overpriced, I mean expensive, fitness products that you can buy and then allows you to pay more money each month to have access to online workout classes and activities. Okay, great. Now that that's over, we can finally get closer to talking about the reasons why Peloton stock made shareholders broke to the point where their spouses question their intelligence. So as always, do yourself a favor, sit back, relax, and watch the entire video, because you're watching a Mr. Business video, so really that means there's nothing else you could be doing that's as fun and educational over the next 8 to 10 minutes than watching this video. And who knows, it may just help you avoid making an investment in a business that leaves you with pennies on the dollar and a high likelihood of your spouse wanting to leave you, I mean permanent capital loss in the future. Anyways, here's the Peloton stock story in the first of 5 reasons why an investment in Peloton stock made shareholders broke. Over-optimism for the future of the business. At its peak valuation in late December of 2020, Peloton had a market cap of over $47 billion. For reference, this made the business 1.5 times more valuable than the Hershey company at the time, a business with a brand that's been around for over 100 years, and by the end of 2020, Hershey had over $1 billion in cash on hand, with billions in income from operations to easily satisfy their debt's interest obligations, just how they had been comfortably doing for years prior to COVID, while compared to Peloton, who never actually had an entire profitable calendar year, but only had a positive income from operations for the last 9 months of 2020, or better known as the beginning of the COVID era. So even though Hershey actually made money for years prior and Peloton didn't, and they actually made money for the year 2020 and Peloton didn't, Peloton was still valued higher by the market. Now fortunately for us, we're as smart as the greatest investor of all time, so we know that a business is worth the sum of all future cash flows from now until Judgment Day, discounted back to the present. So clearly in Peloton's case, it's fair to say that market participants anticipated cash flows to remain positive and growing over a long enough duration that when discounted back to the present at an appropriate rate, the sum would actually be higher than the valuation of purchase price. However, we are from the future, so we know that didn't actually happen, and that brings us to our second point, which would be Peloton's lack of differentiation, which thus led to the reason Peloton had such a large decline in revenue. So as we just saw, over-optimism about the future of the business from shareholders got the valuation of the business high in the first place, but it was the large decline in revenue that played a pivotal role in its stock decline. Now this point of a lack of product differentiation leading to a decline in revenue really is key in understanding why Peloton as a business failed tremendously. They were always going to be susceptible to either increased competition in the selling of their specific niche, such as a competitor offering similar bikes and classes for the same price, or a viable alternative that was available for consumers at a much cheaper price point, which I'll go over more in just a moment. And this makes sense when you think about it. Let's think about a product that actually has differentiation, like an Apple iPhone. Now in a world of over 6 billion smartphone users, there's no such thing as a unanimous best phone. But for a large amount of them, them, the iPhone is certainly a favorite. It's a favorite to a point that many smartphone users not only prefer it over any other smartphone at the same price point, but even if an alternative smartphone was much cheaper, they would still pay more money for the iPhone. And we know this because an iPhone is on the higher end of cost for a smartphone, but it still leads in units sold. So clearly there is something different about the iPhone that even when there are cheaper and viable alternatives to purchase a device that makes calls, sends text messages, snaps photos, and accesses the web and social media, people still pay more money for their product. Let's contrast this with Peloton and their products with the subscription service. Unlike the iPhone, they are not exactly considered the best or most sought after product in the case of fitness experiences, but they're easily some of the most expensive fitness activities you could do when you compare it to an alternative, like going to a public gym or swimming at a rec center or even any free activity outdoors like hiking or running. The reality is, Peloton did not have some sort of differentiation for the majority of potential users of their products to justify spending so much money when they were cheaper in what more people would consider ideal fitness activities. It was just that during the COVID lockdown, many public fitness experiences like a gym or yoga and spinning classes were closed, and even free experiences like hiking or walking on certain trails were closed too. Individual fitness activities were still available, such as walking or running around your neighborhood, but studies show you are statistically more likely to maintain your fitness goals by having a partner, and that's what Peloton was able to provide during the COVID era that self-fitness activities couldn't. The benefits of accountability. But as we just saw, the value Peloton was able to provide was short-lived by the end of COVID, and more affordable alternatives were becoming available again by the end of 2020. Unfortunately, Peloton did not see things this way, and actually purchased Precor, another fitness company, for $420 million in cash. After knowing what we just went over, it should not be much of a coincidence that the purchase of Precor was the beginning of Peloton's stock and business decline. But if all of that sounds bad enough for Peloton, the harsh reality is that the return of alternate exercise options wasn't the only obstacle they faced when it came to avoiding revenue loss, which leads us to our third point, an increase in interest rates. An increase in interest rates that began to occur in 2022 hurt Peloton's shareholders in multiple ways. Just like my ex-girlfriend calling me across the country and dumping me 4 hours after I got there hurt me in multiple ways. Now we know that Peloton's products aren't exactly considered cheap for the average person, and many people purchasing them rely on credit in doing so. So an increase in interest rates naturally increase the total cost of the product to the consumer. Add in the fact that the entire premise of increased interest rates was to help combat the, at the time, and certainly not anymore, levels of rampant inflation. A typical consumer would have a hard time justifying the purchase of a luxury piece of exercise equipment at a now higher price through credit when life itself was already becoming more expensive. And honestly, it's easier for someone to justify purchasing a new laptop for $2,000 to $3,000 because it helps with your ability to make money through work, but an expensive piece of exercise equipment that's going to cost you additional money each month when you have countless viable alternatives of exercise available at a much cheaper price point now is hard to do. The second way that an increase in interest rate hurt Peloton shareholders, because an increase in interest rates hurt business valuations and thus stock prices across the board. Now, do you remember when we said that a business is worth the sum of all future cash flows from now until Judgment Day, discounted back to the present at an appropriate discount rate? And if the sum were to be higher, the justification of purchase can be made. Well, an increase in interest rates is going to create a valuation using a higher discount rate that is going to ultimately lower the value of the discounted cash flows, or better said, the value of the overall business. Peloton actually has negative cash flows for the last 3 years, but if you have any assumption that things would turn around and they would be positive again one day, they would ultimately be lower with a higher discount rate. If all of that didn't sound bad enough, wait until you hear the fourth reason. That would be due to an increase in shares outstanding, thus diluting shareholders' ownership in the business and decreasing their claims to future earnings, if there ever are any. Peloton has had an astounding increase in shares outstanding since 2020. Doing so has created no favors in helping raise the stock price. And the fifth and final reason why Peloton shareholders went broke would be overall pessimism about the future business. A stark contrast from how Peloton was perceived by the market 2.5 years ago. And it's honestly hard to blame anybody after everything we just went over. To make matters matters worse, Peloton actually came into agreement to exchange convertible senior notes for an amount of $1 billion, near its peak valuation. While the notes have a 0% coupon and are unrealistically going to be exchanged into stock with how the stock price is going today, with the stock being nowhere near a 65% premium to the agreed date share price, Peloton will have to come up with the cash to satisfy the debt to avoid bankruptcy, which means they would need to borrow more money to pay that debt off and now have to actually pay interest on the new debt. Naturally, the riskier a business is, the higher the interest payment will be on the new debt, making it so much harder for future shareholders to see an actual profit one day after all expenses and interest payments are accounted for. Peloton also attempted to delay their opening of a $400 million factory from 2023 to 2024 due to having a large backlog of inventory, ultimately scrapping the entire plan altogether in the ending, and even cut over 40% of its staff after multiple rounds of layoffs by the end of 2022 in an effort to reduce expenses. A glaring admission of inaccurate forecasting of future demand and capital allocation by management. I honestly think if I went over every reason why Peloton stock made shareholders broke and how bleak the future looks, I could be here for 5 hours, which is about 1 hour longer than my trip to visit my ex, mind you. The truth is, an investment in Peloton stock at its peak valuation made shareholders broke because the initial stock price already had every best case scenario possible coming true baked into the valuation. And when reality of how the products were actually going to be demanded after a post-COVID boom became clear, the decline in stock price followed the demand of the company. An increase in interest rates, the dilution of ownership through the increase in shares outstanding, and of course the bleakness and uncertainty from here for Peloton further supported and solidified its downfall. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments, do you own a Peloton? Do you like it? Do you think Peloton has a chance to turn things around from here? If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel, Mr. Business, for more stock and business related content.